people believe that rent should be free and that all rent debt should be forgiven. However, is this how it should be? Today I will be discussing the eviction moratorium and how it is harmful to landlords. This is an important topic because it's happening in today's world. Landlords are suffering and there's some things that we can do about it. I have researched this topic thoroughly and I tried to look at both sides to get a better understanding of the topic as a whole. Overall, the eviction moratorium is a harmful act that is hurting landlords, setting a precedent for abuse of the system, and isn't needed anymore. The moratorium is hurting landlords because they are unable to get the payment needed. But what is this moratorium and why does it have such an impact on landlords? The moratorium is a ban on evictions when COVID took so many jobs and they were unable to pay rent because of COVID. This was fine. It helped tenants in their time of need and enabled them to get back on their feet while COVID took away their jobs. But it has since been extended, therefore violating the Supreme Court's orders. And it's really not needed anymore because of where the virus is at right now. Most people have their jobs back and are able to have a reliable source of income again. And people have started to abuse it, and it is hurting landlords in the process. There have been many instances where this eviction ban has hurt landlords, and the Washington Post outlines many of these stories. Jennifer Collins is one woman who was significantly affected by this ban. She lost her job due to COVID and hoped that her 3 condos would be enough to support her during this time. But she has been struggling with money because her tenants refuse to pay. One mostly lives in another house and has since bought a car, but still refuses to pay rent. She is now desperately trying to sell 2 of her 3 condos. Another example comes from Fox News. One landlord lost $24,000 after his tenants refused to pay rent. And he has also made repairs and stuff to maintain his buildings without any help from the tenants or help from the government. And while he was struggling to pay for his own costs, his tenants were out buying boats. One tenant bought 3 boats while this eviction ban was happening. As you can see from these stories, landlords, and especially small business landlords, are hurting because of this act. Tenants are abusing the system and are able to buy luxury items while still refusing to pay rent. If this doesn't end, countless landlords could lose money and could be forced to close. This ban is a huge problem and evictions still need to happen, but I have brainstormed solutions to try to fix this problem. Tenants should be warned about the eviction, talked about other options for housing and payment, and should be evicted as a last resort. First of all, tenants should be required to pay rent. The virus is at this time is subsided enough and that most people have a steady source of income again. Also, Senator John Kennedy has some insight on this. He says, our economy is back and it's time. Now we still have the virus in which we can talk about, but it's time to regain our lives and we can't give free rent to everyone. If you want free rent, there's nothing free. Everything free, someone had to pay for. He makes a great point in that nothing's free. The eviction ban just means that the burden has moved from the tenant to the landlord. So it's really not helping anything anymore, and it's just moving the burden around to one person to another. Second, if eviction is necessary, the tenant should have ample warning about it. Eviction is never something that should happen overnight, so they need to be warned. The tenant and landlord should discuss other options for payment and housing opportunities. I believe that the landlord should be flexible in payment plans to try to find a solution that works for both parties. And I think the landlord should provide different housing options if the original housing is simply too expensive. Lastly, eviction should be the last resort. If the tenant is not compliant and refuses to pay, I believe the landlord should have the right to evict them. Many communities have actually been implementing similar solutions to mine. NOLA.com outlines solutions for tenants and landlords. Similar to mine, they suggest that landlords could reduce rent and try to find alternative solutions for their tenants. A Pennsylvania association, for example, has been collecting money and giving it to renters in need. NOLA.com also says that landlords should do their best in trying to keep their tenants in their homes as much as possible. As you can see, there are many solutions in place right now that are very similar to mine. We are making huge strides when it comes to understanding both sides, and it's cool to see that my solution is similar to those that are in place right now. But for my solution to be successful, a lot needs to change. But there are many benefits to my solution. and visualizing my solution, it solves the problem because it's fair for both sides. The landlord is able to evict their tenants as a last resort, but the tenant is able to discuss different payment options and exceptions if necessary. And there are many benefits to my solution. Both parties are able to be heard, and they can work out their problems without drastic measures. This solution would strengthen tenant to landlord bonds in that they can talk out their issues together. It would also lessen the need for evictions overall, and it would keep tenants in their homes as much as possible. An example of my solution could go like this. A tenant would refuse to pay rent, but obviously has enough money to. The landlord would say that it is a requirement for them to pay rent, and they would give them multiple eviction notices if the behavior continued. If the tenant still refused to pay, the landlord and tenant would sit down and talk about different payment options or different housing options. But if the tenant still didn't comply, the landlord would have the right to evict them. And although there are many other examples of how my solution could work, I think it's a great step in trying to solve this problem. In conclusion, the eviction moratorium is hurting landlords and is letting people abuse the system. Where the virus is right now, it's really not needed anymore, and it's hurting more than it's helping. I believe my solution could really help, though. Again, this isn't a made-up situation, nor is it a thing of the past. This is happening right now, and it's probably affecting people that you know. Whether if it's a renter or a landlord, thousands of people are being affected right now. In closing, I would like to call you all to action. There are many simple things that you can do to try to help this cause. A really easy thing is to write a letter to your senator or congressman talking about this, to just be a voice of reason when discussing this topic and advocating for my solution. We aren't hopeless in this matter, and we can make a difference if we stick together and advocate for what is right. Thank you guys so much for listening.